Welcome to Ask Alan Anything. We have a very interesting program for you today, an important program. If you've been following the news, the Oregon Legislature met in special session a couple weeks ago, and they are about ready to do so again. All kinds of questions are come up as a result of this. Will there be pandemic liability protection for businesses? What's the timing of the special session? Budget cuts. There's a huge budget shortfall. Who will take the biggest hits? Will they tap state reserves? Will there be tax increases? What are infectious disease protocols? There's a quarantine leave fund. What's that all about? There have, since our last episode of Ask Alan Anything, there have been 2 executive orders by the governor. People have asked questions about the mask rule that we will get into, and there is some possible good news, very good news for small businesses with regards to PPP loan forgiveness. I'm Alan Thayer, an Oregon business attorney, and throughout my years of practicing law, it's also been important for me to advocate for business on public policy issues. I have been on the board of directors and the executive committee for Oregon Business and Industry and its predecessor, Associated Oregon Industries, and also have served with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on their board as a founding member of their Small Business Council, in which I continue to serve, and now as a member of their National Return to Work Task Force. We have with us today Sandra McDonough, who is the President and CEO of Oregon Business and Industry. Sandy, welcome.
Morning, Alan. How are you?
So Sandy's a native Oregonian. That's a distinction I miss out on by 1 year, but I cannot say that. So congratulations, Sandy. For people from Eugene may be interested to know that Sandy spent some time down here attending the University of Oregon and comes down frequently for football games and in roles where she has served her university. She had a career in journalism and industry, and then became head of the Portland Business Alliance for 14 years, decided it was time to step back, and then 2 years ago answered the call and became head of Oregon Business and Industry. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you.
So Sandy, we have with us a number of business owners and several HR professionals in the manufacturing industry, construction contractors, retailers, social service agencies, professional services, and even a chemical manufacturer is represented with us today. And I know that we are all very interested to find out what is going to be going on with the Oregon Legislature when they meet in special session. But before we get to that, you've met in one special session already, and another one is on its way, and they've been conducting this under pandemic procedures. What are the pandemic procedures, and are they good for democracy?
Well, when you flashed up that picture of the legislature, I thought, well, that's not the recent session we had, because what they did was they only allowed members of the legislature and staff in the building. So, public, including the lobby, business lobby, which I think is an important part of the process, we weren't allowed to be in the building. So the hearings were conducted by Zoom. We spent many, many hours on Zoom calls. They moved a lot of things really fast. And I think we learned the strengths and a lot of the weaknesses in that system. It was challenging to be able to have input. It was to make sure that we could get our position heard. And frankly, what our job is the lobby is to make sure that the lawmakers know what the real life impact of what they're looking at is. When we hear from all of the businesses on this call, and then we go and we kind of relay what we know. So it was challenging, and I'm really concerned. Not only will the next special session look like that, but I think we may see some of the 21 session look like that. So we've got to start thinking about what the goals for the road be, so that there can be the proper amount of input, and we can protect democracy.
So speaking of the first special session, what happened during that session? I think it was just 3 days. Is that correct?
It was, 3 days, felt longer. It was a very limited session. They announced before they got there that they were not going to deal with budget issues in that session. So they dealt with a lot of the police oversight issues that were important. They had a bipartisan coalition that came through with a number of bills that were passed, and then some issues related to the pandemic. Some use of the CARES Act, a couple of procedural things for the for state agencies. They extended the renter protections. They created a new rule around limiting foreclosures, which we were actually concerned about because of the potential secondary impact that could have. We were concerned it could chill lending. But they really did not take on the big budget issue. We had hoped that they would address liability protection for limited, targeted, and temporary liability protection for businesses, schools, local governments. We formed a very strong coalition to say this is important. And frankly, I would say they didn't address it, but the leadership had said they were not going to address it. And we kind of forced the issue. We had an extraordinary ability to impact the hearing. We had, I think 30 people testifying. We had, thanks to everybody on this call, hundreds of emails thousands actually of emails go to the building saying this was important. And what we got out of that was a commitment to a work group to design something that will go to the next one. Couple other issues that we're watching were not passed, but they're still out there, so we're keeping an eye on.
Do you know when a second session is expected?
Well, you never really know when until the governor makes the call, or in the very rare cases where the legislature calls itself into a special session. I think this will be one where the governor will make the call. We're expecting it in early August. I've heard potentially somewhere around August 10th. There's meetings going on right now this week, Ways and Means and others, to start framing what that will be. And that session will look at some budget issues and a couple other substantive issues.
So you mentioned liability immunity with regard to the pandemic. So there's been a group that's meeting. Do we know the framework of what is likely to be presented?
Well, that is in flux as we speak. Before I got on this meeting with you, Alan, I was reading a big series of emails about it. I think there is some of this discussion is sort of easy. You say we need liability for school districts. Well, everybody wants to do that, right? So liability protections. School districts have been tremendous partners on this. What we want to make sure is that businesses get liability protection, that the employer relationship, not just employer, but what we're trying to explain is that a business's concerns go beyond the employer-employee relationship, which some people say, well, that can go to workers' comp. If there is a case, the employee can make a workers' comp claim if they feel they were exposed at the workplace. But there's other liabilities that a business can have, a customer coming in, or some secondary impact, or maybe the business produces PPEs, which a lot of Oregon businesses have retooled. So we're making sure, trying very hard to make sure that our business concerns remain on the table. So far, the group that's been meeting has just been legislators. They haven't had stakeholders like us at the table, but we are talking to those legislators all the time. I'm really proud of the work that OBI did. Our lobbyist really has led the charge on making sure that this liability issue doesn't go away. We're also watching, by the way, what's going on at the federal level, and we know that the conversations around a deal around for extended pandemic relief and potentially some funding might include something around liability protections in that. And that would be awesome if we got something from the federal level.
Well, actually, it was reported earlier this week on a video conference I was part of that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is now actually talking about a separate standalone limited liability protection bill, separate from what they're calling the Phase 4 stimulus.
Right, but you know how these things get linked. And remember, it's got to get through the Democratic House too. So there will obviously have to be some sort of a set of agreements if they're going to move this, but we're just excited that the conversation is still going. I've heard from employers who've said, many employers who've said, this is the single biggest issue facing us because there's so many unknowns in this world right now with how we're managing COVID. And what I've seen, I talk to employers every single day, and people are doing their best to comply with all the guidance that's out there. They're doing everything they can to protect their employees. So our position is that if you're doing what you're told to do, if you're following the guidance, then you should not face unfair lawsuit. If somebody is negligent and they're not doing what they're supposed to, then they'll get sued, right? But if you're doing what you are supposed to do, you should not be sued.
I can tell you also, Sandy, that in the legal profession, there are all kinds of seminars out there right now for plaintiffs' attorneys on potential claims relating to the coronavirus. And in fact, I talked to an attorney yesterday from Eastern Washington on a whole different reason involving a construction dispute. But he was telling me how he is planning a number of COVID lawsuits. And
right. And I think at the end of the day, you're the lawyer here, Alan. You can't stop somebody from filing a lawsuit, but the state can say, this area, we have temporary and targeted protection. That is what we're asking for people who follow the rules. It's very important.
Well, I know that you know how important this is, and we appreciate your work in this area. And let me know if there's anything we can do to help with your advocacy.
Great, thank you.
So the second session, biggest focus is going to be the budget deficit. Do we know how big is?
Well, huge. And I'm going to say I don't think anybody really knows. Anybody who is projecting what happens next in this downturn, I'm kind of thinking, what are they smoking, right? Because there's a lot of unknowns on when the end of the job loss will come. I have a friend who talks about the economy being on a sugar high right now. There's all the federal stimulus money in our economy. I think we're grateful for that. All of it has kept the economy going, whether it's the unemployment supplements that have kept families going, and then the families can pay rent and they can buy food and do what they need to do, which is important to the economy, and then the PPP loans as well. And I don't think we have a sense of how many jobs are being protected because of that PPP money, and at some point that's going to run out, right? So, and then we haven't yet had all of the secondary impacts and what you're talking about here, the loss of government revenue. So the last forecast from the state, which was in May, projected that the revenue loss to the state would be about $10.5 billion over the next 5 years. That's a big number. In the current biennium, they're saying the revenue shortfall from budget is about $2.7 billion. And then in the next biennium, they're projecting, this was in May, $4.4 billion in lost revenue. Those are really big numbers. And we're concerned about, A, what they're going to do to address the issue, but B, I mean, there's some important public services that, impact all of us.
And just to remind everyone, Oregon is one of a handful of states where deficit spending is prohibited. So Oregon has to balance its budget.
Right.
And so they have to address this as much as they may like to kick the can down the field, as they say. Is it down the field, down the road, wherever the can's getting kicked? Their ability to do so is limited. So how will they close this shortfall? Do we know?
Well, I think we're going to see different stages. I think in the next special session is going to focus to a large degree on the budget. And the co-chairs, if you want to share the screen that I brought, the Ways and Means co-chairs have developed a series of principles. Whoops, that's not the one I want you sharing. Let me give you another one. That's something I was Googling before this all started. I will share a screen. Let me do another one here. Alan and I are experimenting with different ways to share screens. So, well, I don't see that one, Alan, so I will just wing it. The Ways and Means co-chairs have laid out a series of priorities that they believe are important, and it's areas that you would expect. It's the protecting schools, the state school fund. It's protecting state police in there, aid to local government, aid to medical service providers. So they basically have a framework of these are basic state services that we need to be thoughtful about as we look at cutting the budget. Now, the governor has ordered state agencies to show very significant state budget cuts, something in the realm of, for the last half of the year, I think it's about 16, 17%, big budget cuts to accommodate that across the board. The governor can only do across the board budget cuts. We know that's not going to happen, right? So I think what you'll see in this first special session are some targeted budget cuts. They've got to do them. They have challenges, when you look at, for example, what most businesses would do, which is salary freeze or salary reduction. That's very hard with the collective bargaining contracts that they have. So I think that they will, you'll see some actions like that, and then you will see them access part of the state reserves. The good news is we are well reserved. We've got about $1.5 billion in reserves, so I think you'll see some of that access to get them through this biennium. So there'll be a combination of budget cuts and reserves and, what other things they can do with the budget, sort of moving things around. And we've been in there, saying this is not the time for new programs, not the time for new spending. I just reviewed some testimony we're going to submit to Ways and Means saying don't raise fees to backfill. We're very concerned about that. So it will be, I want to point out one thing about the reserves. A decade ago, when we were in another downturn, it was the business leaders in Oregon who really pounded on the state to replenish a rainy day fund, and the old corporate kicker money went into that. And I'm just going to say this shows we were right. You need a well-funded reserve fund for backup for time. I don't think they'll take all the money. I think they'll take part and move forward.
Thanks for mentioning businesses' leadership on the reserve fund. I was going to ask you about that. So I mean, I know some of the folks in the legislature, their favorite way to solve budget gaps are with tax increases. Are there any tax increases currently on the table?
At the state level, no. And the key word there is currently, right? I don't know of any that would be on the table in this special session. I think that would be a very hard effort to pull off. We are watching fee increases because that's a tendency in some agencies to take a cut and then backfill with fee increases. So we're keeping an eye on that. My concern around taxes is going to be in the 2021 session. That is that when they start looking for $4.4 billion and how do they maintain these programs that they've created, that they're important to them, I think the natural tendency for them will be to look to taxing. So we're getting ready to build a strong line of defense on that. And what we've been saying pretty consistently is our focus needs to be on bringing jobs back. And how do you grow your way out of a downturn like this, including the hit on the state money? Is we're an income tax dependent state. We need people working. That's how we get our tax revenue in this state. So help us restore jobs, which will help you restore incomes. That's been a continuing refrain from the business community for years, and it's the truth. You need good jobs generating incomes that generate tax.
Well, and it also too decreases the need for services.
Yes. What services are you thinking about?
Well, if there's a lot of people who have jobs, you don't have as much money going out for unemployment, for other social services.
Now, remember, the unemployment fund is paid for by employers, which the unemployment insurance we all pay. We've reminded the employment department of that many times in the last few very difficult months that, employers pay that assuming that their people get protected when they're laid off, right? But yes, so it's better all the way around if people are working. You have a strong economy, strong services that we need, and then fewer people calling on some of the social services. One of the things we're doing at OBI right now is we've hired, we're working with the Council on State Taxation and Ernst & Young to take a look at what's happened to the business tax burden in this state specifically over the last couple of years, but we're going to remind people of everything that happened in the last decade. So statewide, and then you guys are Eugene, but for the Portland Metro folks, we're going to layer on top of that the many, many tax increases that have hit the major metropolitan area and the increasing burden on businesses. And I've checked in with the Eugene Chamber and Brittany over there, and we're going to be down in your area to make a presentation of the tax study when we get it done.
So in the budget cutting process, where do you expect to see the battle lines drawn from which part of the budget versus what other part of the budget?
Well, I think that it's going to be pretty much what we've always seen, and that there will be a real focus on protecting K-12 education, and for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's very important that we have a strong K-12 system, and then the very strong public sector union stake in that one. You'll see, so there'll be a big push around protecting K-12 for lots of reasons. You might see, a push. There was a real effort to protect to fund early childhood education, and businesses always said that's early childhood education is key. I think you're going to see a push from that area to protect the new funding they've gotten. You might see a little bit of push and pull over what happens with all the new programs that were created in the Student Success Fund? Do you move forward with those immediately? Do you put them on hold? What do you do? Because they're all new, supposed to start September 1. I think you'll see the, kind of a conflict between supporting the basic school fund first versus going forward with these new programs. And there's not going to be a lot of extra money. So how does that play out? And then I think for all of us who follow higher education, we know that the community colleges and the universities frequently come up short in these discussions. And I worry about that. I think our state higher education institutions are in crisis right now. And they're so dependent on tuition. And, that's been a real problem. And then going forward, what kind of support they get from the state is going to be critical, because the burden goes back to the families and the students. So we're watching that. There's always that push. You'll see other agencies get cut. The usual, conflicts within the legislature, some of the rural urban kinds of conflicts you'll see. We will be watching, again, as I've said, fees, particularly agencies like DEQ, which has new programs related to the governor's carbon initiative. I think you're going to see, you may see questions over how much new programs like that should get funded. So we'll see.
Any prediction on how long it'll last?
The special session?
Yes.
Well, here's the deal. If it goes much beyond a couple of days, we're all in trouble. So hopefully they will have some semblance of an agreement before they get in, and it will do 2 or 3 days. If they go beyond that, that basically gives them the opportunity to open up a whole bunch of issues. Now, remember, we want them to do liability at that issue, at that session. So we're still pushing hard on that. Another issue that we're in the middle of conversations around is workers' comp presumption, where there's been a push to have COVID-related issues be presumed for coverage. Oh, you're up ahead of me. For workers' comp. At the last session, we successfully said, we have a system for dealing with that, which is the Management Labor Advisory Committee set up 30 years ago when Mahonia Hall Compact reformed our workers' comp system. Issues that go to the legislature related to workers' comp are supposed to go to the Management Labor Advisory Committee. They've been meeting. There wasn't unanimous agreement between the labor and management side of that. So there is going to be, they will move forward the issues that they did have consensus on. So I think this issue may still be on the table when we get there.
And can you explain what they mean by COVID presumption?
Well, it means that if a worker makes a claim that they got COVID on the job, it would be presumed to be covered by your workers' comp insurance. It's basically a guarantee of coverage. And I think for some industries, we work very closely with SAFE, State Accident Insurance Fund. For some of the frontline workers, they're pretty close to that. If somebody's been at a hospital, 7 days a week for the last 3 months and they come down with COVID, you can kind of guess what happened there, right? So I think they're looking at some different standards. We're concerned about the potential for a very broad presumption standard because of the potential impact to workers' comp rates down the line. We're doing contact tracing. We think if somebody gets COVID and they say it's on the job, you need to do the contact tracing and really specifically trace back to where the infection happened. So we'll see how that one works out.
It happened at the workplace, not at the big party they went to a week ago.
And who knows? And sometimes it is going to be, you don't want to say you'll never file and you'll never get it, but there's a process. We're saying do the process. So MLAC, we've always believed that MLAC should be able to review and recommend to the legislature, that's the Management Labor Advisory Committee, anything related to workers' comp, and they will have something about this, and it's likely to be part of the discussion at the next special session.
So this is a part of a new segment that I'm calling What Is That? And so we covered the COVID presumption. Infectious disease protocols. What is that?
This is something that we are watching carefully. There was a legislative proposal to have a new infectious disease standard for how employers manage infectious disease outbreaks, what that means for time off for workers, but how do you have to manage for it? And it went away at the legislature. And then we learned immediately afterward that OSHA is doing a rulemaking. So that is in process right now. Our expectation is that they're going to move quickly to do a temporary rule, and then it will become a permanent rule. And it is likely to cover a lot of infectious diseases, not just COVID. It will be long-term and permanent and could, cover influenza, any kind of infectious disease. So we are watching that one very carefully. Our concern right now is employers have had so many different mandates to follow, and it's hard, it's confusing. We're doing our best to make sure people knew, and this was like one more. And then, long-term, what does it mean? And how does it stack up against all of the other rules that employers have to comply with? As Alan knows, we have a brilliant woman on our staff named Paloma Sparks, who's an employment lawyer, and she is in they've got stakeholder groups going on, and she is our voice in those stakeholder groups, which are going on right now on this. More to come.
And then in our last What Is That category, quarantine leave fund. What is that? I suspect Paloma's name is going to come up again with this one as well.
We worked on this one. We have a great coalition of business. I got to tell you, I don't think I have ever seen the business community coalesce as strongly as we have over the last 6 months to share information and to be one voice on how we advocate for businesses in this very difficult time. So the quarantine leave fund came up at the last emergency board, and basically they have set aside money for people who do not have the ability to access time off for if they have to quarantine because they have been exposed to COVID. So it's a lot of small businesses, businesses with 10 or fewer employees who are not required to offer paid time off. 10, Alan, you'll remember that, under Oregon law. So it's a fund that they can go to. We work closely with them. Our concern was, again, another level of leave that employers need to keep track of. The way this one's going to work is that the impacted Oregonian will apply to the state for the funding. So it doesn't go through the employer. And they do have to attest that they know it's their responsibility to tell their employer they're going to be out with this funding. We didn't want another leave program for Oregon employers to have to manage. We've got it already.
So it's been 2 weeks since my last webinar, and during that time, the governor has issued not one, but 2 executive orders to try to control the pandemic. The first was on July 15th, and to a large degree, that's the face mask order. And Sandy, one of the things that I caution people on is to be careful with the word mask, because I have long predicted that if people refer to mask and instead of a surgical mask or medical grade mask, they're talking about a face covering, such as this lovely job here that my daughter made for me. And if they call that a mask, there will be lawsuits where they said, no, you promised mask and you didn't require mask. It was just a face covering. Interesting, Sandy, in the July 15th order, for the first time, they start defining mask and face coverings and face shields, which just kind of heightens my concern about the possibility of someone getting in trouble by referring to mask when they mean face coverings. But that's the July 15th order. And
So
then
I'm trying to remember all of the orders. There was the one before the July 1st order, which required face coverings inside in Oregon in the specified list of places. It's in the order, right? And then July 15th said you must wear face coverings in all inside places, and if you cannot maintain 6 feet, you have to wear them outside as well, right?
yeah, the July 15th is they define businesses, but they are mostly consumer type businesses,
Right.
Restaurants, pharmacies,
Yeah.
those sorts of things.
Right. And
Um,
then the most recent one that came out today, is taking effect today, is that children 5 and older have to wear face masks. Restaurants have to close at 10 o'clock. And if you, some areas had allowed some venues to go up to, if you're in phase 2, go up to 250 people. Now there's no venue that can be more than 100 people. And that's statewide, regardless of what phase county it's in. A number of counties are on watch right now, which means I think that if their cases continue going up, they could be adjusted in what phase they're in. I mean, what the governor said, and we understand this, is that we've seen way more cases. We had more cases I think in July than, I can't remember, than we had in all of May. It was in some days in July than we had in all of May. There's a spike everywhere. We've seen some counties in particular, the major spikes. Interesting, a lot of them are rural counties. So they're trying to manage that. We're next week going to publish a economic report that says that to a large degree, the virus is calling the shots. It's not just with what's limited by government, but it's how much anybody is willing to go out if they don't feel safe. People have to feel safe, and business has to feel confident about bringing people back, right? Customers and employees. And we have to be thinking long-term about, immediate and long-term about recovering the job. So there's a new order that we're expecting early next week, which the governor mentioned, and that's going to be a kind of travel restriction. While we've been here, I had an email from the governor's chief on what it's going to look like, but I think it's going to say that people traveling to Oregon from areas with high COVID cases need to self-isolate. And we have been talking to the governor's office, and they are going to create an exemption for work-related travel. We're very about that. People have to travel for their work. If you have to go to LA and come back, then
So talking about these orders and guidances, getting back to the liability issue, it's very important that businesses be aware of the various orders and adopt procedures to comply with those orders, because if there is some sort of a liability protection for business, it is required that you follow all of those procedures, that if you don't follow those procedures, you don't get the liability protection. Now, in the description below this video, there is a link to the state website where all of these orders and guidances and FAQs are set out. And you can just scroll on down and click on that link, and you will have the latest information. As that information changes, as Sandy told us, there's yet another order that's likely on its way. Also in the links, you'll see a link to the Oregon Business and Industry web page, where there too are guidances for businesses on what businesses need to do to comply. And if there is to be liability protection, it will be incumbent upon businesses that want to take advantage of that to comply with all of those requirements.
Right. So, Alan, can I jump in?
Please.
Two things. We have been advising our business members to write down their plan and train their employees and document that they have done that. It's really important that you have some documentation, put up signs. OBI is working with a company called Malfoster Alongi to do some training session on what businesses need to do. We're segmenting them. We did one for manufacturing, one for retail, and we're doing another for office workers to train businesses on what they need to do to demonstrate that they're compliant. And you can find that on our website, OregonBusinessIndustry.com. There's a member price and there's a non-member price. If you're not a member and you want to do it, shoot me an email and I'll let you do it in our next series at the member price. Happy to do that. On the face covering issue, what I have found, and I've talked to a lot of members about this, I talk to members, really the last 6 months, I've talked to members just constantly. Our businesses want to comply. They want to be safe. They understand that if you wear a mask, you're protecting somebody else. So I think people are really trying very hard to comply. Our concern has not been on the face covering mandate. In fact, a lot of companies you'll see nationally are doing them voluntarily, and that started here in Oregon. It's more about we've been very concerned about the burden on businesses to basically police their customers. If a customer is in a grocery store and in aisle 7 decides to take their mask off, and there's it's the grocery store that faces the penalty, not the and it's really hard it's a big burden, and we know that's a very big burden for grocery stores and all people to basically tell their staff, in addition to everything else you do, you now have to police our customers' compliance with this rule. So I just want you to know we know that's a burden, and we have raised that many times.
Sandy, will that be addressed in the liability relief provisions?
I think that the most important thing I don't know that penalties will be, that's about lawsuits. I will tell you, I think to a large degree, the regulators have tried to approach this as educating people, but I mean, it's hard. I just talked to a very large employer last night about the Oregon Health Authority's practice of publishing workplaces that have, on a daily basis, if they have 20 related cases, and then weekly they do 5. I mean, we're very concerned about that. We're concerned that, these potential lists for the trial lawyers you mentioned, Alan, to kind of go through and pick people out, and it's hard. So, but I don't think it'll be addressed, and we're just telling people, document that you have a plan, document that you're doing the procedures, train your people, and document that.
Good advice. Good advice. So When the Ask Alan Anything webinar started on May 1st, PPP loans have been a huge topic. Less of a concern lately. Most businesses that wanted to apply for PPP loans have, in fact, made their application. Now we're getting to the point of loan forgiveness. And these are just discussions at this time, but there is some potential good news. It is reported that in Washington, D.C., there is significant discussion about making PPP loan forgiveness automatic if the loan is less than a certain amount. Two different proposals out there, one at $150,000 threshold and the other at $250,000. The thought is that this loan was always intended as a grant, that in the application process, all sorts of certifications needed to be made. And why should people have to go through that process all over again? So Sandy, I understand that OBI has been involved in this area. What can you share with us?
Well, the interesting thing is that the request that we weigh in came from some of my major banking members who have made a lot of these loans. And I got a call from one of them and they said, hey, can you support this effort that was actually started by the National Banking Institution in DC? And it made sense that, you know, if you've got a small business, they're running hard to just keep their head above water. They got the loan. Moving to automatic forgiveness makes sense rather than trying to figure out this very difficult paperwork that they've got. So we weighed in early and we in support of this. And a number of our trade associations were in several, including the U.S. Chamber, the National Association of Manufacturers, and others. We've all weighed in on this, just saying this makes sense.
So these are tough times for businesses, and there is an awful lot that businesses have to do to just try to keep their businesses afloat. And yet there's an awful lot happening in Salem, both with Legislature, special sessions, certainly the session that will be coming, the regular session that'll be coming up at the beginning of next year, and with the governor's office and with other Oregon administrative agencies. What can business people do to get involved when they have so much at stake riding on what the state of Oregon may choose to do to them next?
Well, let me tell you about how we have an impact. We managed to move the liability protection issue from a non-starter to a work group to, you know, who knows ultimately what it'll look like, only because people like the folks on this call, and I know the Eugene's chamber and the Springfield chamber were part of this effort, sent emails to legislators and said, this is really important. They got thousands of emails from people saying this was really important. So the single most important thing people can do is make sure you're a part of a group, OBI, your local chamber, get on our mailing list. And when we say we need business to weigh in, we need you to tell your personal story about why these issues are important. That's how when it's somebody like me who does this stuff every day, you know, I'm not as impactful as, you know, Nancy Nathanson walking into a business in Eugene and hearing from that business owner why how something impacts them and the people that they employ and the customers they serve. So speak up, email, make sure your local legislators know what's impactful to you, and work through your associations to make sure we know what issues are important to you. That makes sense, Alan?
Well, it does. So, you know, for a lot of businesses, budgets are tight right now, but I I will say that it is important to invest in public advocacy. It's important to invest in an association like Oregon Business and Industry, which is the business voice, or the voice for all businesses in Salem. And take a look at the OBI webpage and seriously consider joining as a member. We still are accepting new members. Is that correct, Sandy?
Yes, and you just happen to be our membership leader on the board, so thank you for that.
Yes, I should have began with that disclaimer, I guess, but it is certainly something that I have invested a lot of time in over the years, and I know that Sandy, you and your staff have helped a number of businesses in Lane County when they've had particular issues, and we certainly appreciate that.
And Alan, right now, what I want everybody to know is, if you're a business and you have a question and you need help sorting through this COVID issue, call us. We don't care if you're a member. Our job is to help businesses sort out what's going on. And if you go to our website, we make sure you know how to, where sources of PPE are. We make sure you know all the regulations. It's all right there. And the last 6 months, we have really understood the role we play in being a resource when stuff. So call us and help.
And once again, that website, a link to that website is in the description below this video, and encourage people to, at the very least, visit the website and poke around and see what's there. Of course, if you have any questions, you can call Sandy, you can call me, or you can send a question to ask Alan anything, and we can address it at a future webinar. Sandy, thank you for being here today, and thank you for all that you and the OBI staff are doing for business in Salem.
Thank you. It was great to do it. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.